The Southern Alberta Council on Public Affairs acknowledges that we are gathered on the lands of the Blackfoot people of the Canadian Plains, and we pay respect to the Blackfoot people, past, present, and future, while recognizing and respecting their cultural heritage, beliefs, and relationship to the land. We offer respect to the Métis and all who have lived on this land and made Lethbridge their home.
Our speakers this afternoon are three teachers, and we're so glad to have them.
Thank you.
They're going to introduce themselves, and so let's just jump right into this. But our speakers are Kevin McBeath and Danielle Gareau and Derek Resler, who are speaking on the current situation on public education and how we get back on track. So, Kevin.
Great, thank you very much. Just get this to the right height for me. Hi, welcome. I'm really excited to be here. Typically I'm in front of a group of teenagers and I get to walk around. So standing in one place is actually a little bit difficult for me, so hopefully we'll be able to navigate it. But my name is Kevin McBeath. I do teach high school social studies at Winston Churchill. I've been doing it there for 22 years, my whole career. And enjoying every minute of it. I prefer duller days in politics, like the dull days of when buying a gazebo in Tony Clement's riding was a scandal, if any of you want to throw that reach back for your politicos out there. But obviously lots happens in the world, and so we're navigating that. Derek Resler teaches at Wilson Middle School, largely shop classes and other things that he's asked to do, and Danielle teaches at LCI social studies and other things in French immersion. So, we're here to talk about public education. My hope is this is nothing new to you because a lot of this information has been shared in a campaign that our association has been putting out. If you weren't aware, our province spends the least per capita on students in public education. So the handout does show you more information and where the statistics that our association accesses from Statistics Canada. And you can see there we're last. We are literally last. There's no other way to describe it. What's difficult about this is when we look at our province in 2012-ish, so just over 10 years ago, we were near the top. We were actually spending nearly the most on public education per student. In that 10 years, only 2 jurisdictions have reduced their spending on public education, ourselves and Saskatchewan. Every other province has increased its per student funding, and so again, we just are lacking the funds. So I know that sounds really simple, but we're going to get into how that complicates the lives of students. Our association does a great deal of research internally. We have a couple of doctors who work for us, PhDs. We'll get to some of the research later, but we also often access research from Janet Brown. Some of you might be familiar with Janet Brown. She does a lot of polling, political polling. She's often, if not always, right. If you've been paying attention to how she's polled 2019 and 2023 provincial elections, and she's often right because of the methodology that she uses. So we very much trust the work that she does and the information that she gathers. And so she's been doing some work for our association, and she knows that from her research that Albertans are not okay with this. They're not okay with the problems that exist and the funding that is lacking. In fact, again, that lack of funding has obviously led to class sizes getting too big, and 3 out of 4 Albertans say that's not okay. That's not okay that classes are getting larger and larger and larger every year. So of course, again, that's going to lead to complications in the classroom. And so we're going to get into the problems first, and yes, we will have solutions. If anybody of you have ever had conversations with teachers, unfortunately, sometimes they like to complain, but it's largely an attempt to advocate and make sure that people are aware of the lived experiences of teachers and students. So some of the research that we've done with our own teachers, through pulse surveys that Dr. Phil McCrae does. Dr. Phil McCrae educated in Pincher Creek through public school system and was a teacher here in Lethbridge for a period of time. Now works for a teachers association. And what we're finding is classes are very, very big. Conveniently, he said sarcastically, the government stopped gathering class size data in 2019. They decided it wasn't worth the time and the effort of government bureaucracy to know how many kids are in each classroom. So we have done the job then of gathering as best the data we can as possible, and we know that class sizes are getting larger and larger each year. For context, in about 20 years ago, the Alberta government did a Commission on Learning, and the Commission on Learning recommended specific class sizes. And so you can see they're on the pencil there, and they're also, I believe, in the colored handout that you have in front of you. So it says, kindergarten through grade 3, there should be 17 kids, 23, 4 to 6. In grades 7 to 9 should be about 25, and then in high school about 27. You can see the separation is those class sizes almost never exist in this province. There are unicorn classrooms that might be in smaller rural divisions, or in other possibly even specialized programs, but they just don't exist. So again, it's hard to know of a problem if you're not aware of it, and so again, the government decided to not track those numbers starting in 2019, but we have done our best to track those things. So of course the problem is if you have more kids, there's likely going to be some more problems. So what we've seen is problems in terms of kids having access to resources, specifically resources that will help them learn better. And so again, you can see this in your handout as well. It's been very difficult to get services and supports for kids if they have learning difficulties. It's been very difficult to access ed psych assessments, speech and language pathology, occupational therapy, anything that is necessary to hopefully bring a kid further along in their ability to learn. It's almost impossible. We know as teachers, if a student comes into our room in September with an undiagnosed learning disability, we will be lucky to get anything done by May or June. The resources do not exist. I actually literally got an email this morning about a student in my grade 9 class who we've been working with. This student has some complex mental health issues, and the only place that they can get serviced in is in Calgary, and that service in Calgary has waiting lists. So now we have to go, well, I guess we'll be the Band-Aid, right? Because again, we don't have access to those support services that will help make inclusion successful, and again, service not just kids with significant needs, just kids who need a little bit extra help. So again, when we take those services away, it becomes problematic. One of the problems, I'll tell another quick story. I have a colleague whose son is in grade 4. In grade 1, 2, and 3, they could not access those ed psych assessments. They were not far enough off the list. So they decided to get it privately funded and got a psychologist to walk them through it, paid for that out of pocket, and now they have a full diagnosis. But that full diagnosis, when it was presented, still does not provide access to supports. So there's no ed assistant to help this student who has dysgraphia and dyslexia and has significant difficulty reading. That's from a capable person who knows how to navigate the education system. My greatest concern is what about people who lack the ability to advocate for themselves, lack the ability to navigate a healthcare system, education system, to try and effectively be that squeaky wheel. And so that's why we are trying to be that squeaky wheel. Again, the other thing that leads to larger classes is complex classes, and one of the things that is not unique to Alberta, this has actually been reported on across the country, is the alarming reality of the levels of aggression that have been increasing in our classrooms, between students and teachers, and in fact, as well as between parents and teachers. And so you can see again, this one is not in your handout, this is from a different group of research. But we see that there's a lot more difficulties with kids even being able to to stay regulated and solve problems. So instead of being able to regulate, especially at the younger ages, and be able to work through and solve problems, they're hitting each other, they're yelling at each other, they're chasing each other. And we know that like that's part of the regulation that happens as young children in development. You know, kids hit, kids yell. But when you're in a classroom of 25 kindergarten kids, which is a classroom in one of our classrooms in the school division, that is supposed to be 17 or fewer, and those 25 kindergarten kids have no education assistant, and one of them is nonverbal, and the way this kid decides to handle problems is headbutting, you go, what does that look like for the education of not just that kid who's dysregulated and nonverbal, but the other 24 who now are getting less attention, less services, less opportunities, because again, we don't have the supports in the classroom, because we don't have the funding in the classroom, because that funding has been eroded effectively over the last 10 years. The other thing that happens when we see levels of aggression and we see complex class sizes and we see larger classes is we're actually seeing fewer people wanting to be teachers. This is the one that honestly breaks my heart as a person who obviously is in this for the long term, is I hear teachers who've taught for 5 years or 10 years, and they say, I don't know how I can do this. I don't know how I can do this another year. We have colleagues in this city who are actively looking for other jobs, even after they've put in 5 years or more at university. They've gone through, become accredited, they've become licensed teachers, and now they're just saying, where is the future in this profession? As best as we understand it, the University of Lethbridge typically admits 400 teachers into 400 applications, thank you, Derek, to become teachers. There was only 260 this last round of admissions. So again, we're seeing a decrease in even the desire for the next generation to want to take on this job. And so again, that's going to complicate scenarios if we don't have adequate people to even be in our classrooms, because there's fewer people to choose from. And again, it's not helpful for turnover, it's not helpful for all those things in an organization where you only have people there for 2 or 3 years before they're feeling burned out. So we want to create a space where people want to be educators, where people feel like they can thrive and reach their full potential as teachers, and therefore, of course, do those things in their classroom that will also allow those kids to access their full potential because of the resources to reach each and every kid. So we do have some solutions, right? Obviously, they are people-focused solutions. And so we know in terms of looking at the idea of even just aggression in classrooms, we can make sure that we're developing strategies that prioritize staff safety and well-being. So again, making sure there's elements of teacher training, because once you're out of university, we have to have access to those professional development learning opportunities to understand how to manage new types of kids who have new types of difficulties learning or difficulties navigating solving their own problems. So my wife works as a teacher as well. She's worked a lot of years in pre-K and kindergarten. She's now a grade 6 teacher. And she knows how to, with this boy, she actually is able to supply some support to this kindergarten boy who likes to headbutt. And she has to do deep pressure with him. So basically, Derek, over here, when she recognizes that Derek is unregulated or dysregulated, she grabs his arm and applies deep pressure onto it, because that's the type of sensory that the child needs. But my wife has had that training. Very few teachers have had that training, so we have to have, again, access to it.
That's good.
And in fact, yeah, it is. It's relaxing. That's the intent, right? It's deregulated. Okay? So again, but we need to have access and more access to those opportunities for teachers to have more of those tools. Of course, more ed assistants would be nice, and smaller classes would also be nice, but it's also good that teachers have a new and best training. Okay? Also, programs connected to behaviorally challenged students. We have fewer behavioral specialists available to us in the school division, again, largely due to a lack of funding. And so I'll just give you the context again of that 25-seat kindergarten class who has this boy who likes to headbutt to solve his problems. The behavioral strategist basically gave the teacher a manual and said, you've taught for a long time, you can figure this out, right? So that's the unfortunate reality, because that behavior specialist isn't trying to be like, oh, I don't want to do it. That behavior specialist is stretched so thin across the whole of the division that they cannot take the time and the effort to actually involve themselves in that classroom. Because instead of having one for 2 schools, we have one for the north side, right? And now they are stretched thin across a large population of students. Again, this idea of making sure that we're also working with divisions, working with principals and administration, again, to update, if it happens to be policy, if it happens to be just, things like discipline and making sure we're navigating that and having the resources to work with parents. We need to make sure that we have, again, those abilities, and those abilities do take time. So again, this research was put together by Dr. Phil McRae, who works for us at the Alberta Teachers Association. That QR code, there should be one on your handout as well. So you can also contact Dr. Phil McRae if you want at research@ata.ab.ca. So again, I know we'll have time for questions, but if there is more information that you want, there are other resources for you to access. The other thing connected to complexity and again, class sizes is just simply reduce class sizes. But the only way to reduce class sizes is to, of course, hire more teachers. That's the only way to do it. We've heard lots of promises for lots of years from lots of different people about hiring lots of teachers. We haven't seen that manifest because the dollars have not found their way to the division. So there's lots of promises, and sometimes they make great headlines, but those things are not happening. I can give you, again, context for me in the school that I teach in, because I've taught there for 22 years. It's the largest our school has ever been. We, in fact, are out of lockers. We don't have lockers for all of our students. So we're at, by the square footage total, we are 97% full, but we have no lockers, so we are clearly over capacity. And there's fewer teachers teaching today than when I started in 2004. So there's more students, fewer teachers. So again, if we can make this a profession and a learning environment where we can make sure that all kids are supported, that we can make sure that the best strategies are used for inclusion, that we have the best access to the best resources, then we know that's going to give the most opportunity for our students, specifically our most vulnerable students, to be able to succeed. One of the other things that obviously connects to our job as well is making sure that we have a quality curriculum that also meets the needs of the next generation of students. Some of you might have followed the curriculum as it was obviously a pretty big political football in the last 8 years. And unfortunately, we haven't had the type of success making sure that we are making a modern and viable curriculum. There is some information out there because they're just starting the 7 to 9 curriculum review. So again, you're free to involve yourself in that process. There's surveys that the government sends out. I do believe they're actually closing very soon for that first round. But again, having effective curriculum, resourcing that curriculum can again enhance the ability to better provide a quality service for public education. And again, that idea of building better communication and better respect between the teaching profession, the paraprofessionals in our teaching profession, and the government and Alberta education. That has been damaged largely because of the curriculum. We were largely shut out of the K-6 curriculum. There was some involvement, but as a person who went through the social studies curriculum as it was redesigned in 2005, early in my career, it was robust, it was exhaustive, and it took several years to just do the social studies curriculum. So it does take time, and so we want to make sure that we are taking the time and accessing the resources to develop quality curriculum. In the end, we know that this is actually what most people want. This is the same research from Janet Brown. Janet Brown, in her research and in understanding what Albertans want and asking them through a variety of different surveys and focus groups, said that the majority of people, 2/3, believe that we are not spending enough on public education. And so when we understand that there are people who see this and know this, some of them have deeper experiences and understandings than others, then we need to, okay, so then how do we make sure that we actually are providing the best resources for our youngest people, and the best resources so that they have the ability to reach their fullest potential. So the math for us is simple. I know it might be complex for other people, and I appreciate that there's lots in the weeds of this, and I'm sure that will come out in many of the questions that you have. But as best as we know right now, the province is predicting a $4.6 billion surplus in the fiscal year. For us to reach the national average, so not top of education spending per capita, just right in the middle, national average, we would need $1.15 billion of that 4.6. So about a quarter of it. And again, for context, because I know math is hard, I have about 1,000 students at Winston Churchill. The amount to take us from last to average is about 1,700. So 1,700 times 1,000, you've all done it before because you learned math before calculators, is $1.7 million. Okay, $1.7 million in a building like Winston Churchill High School could hire a dozen teachers. Okay, maybe more. Plus ed assistants. I haven't even talked to you about how we don't have enough caretakers either. We don't even have enough people to clean our buildings. The problem is our building, you couldn't fit 12 new people in that building. Our building is not at a capacity logistically to add more than 1 or 2 more teachers. There are not enough physical spaces in our school, and that's very similar in a lot of other schools. And so even if that happened, you would still have the next logistical barrier that is briefly being attempted by the government to solve, which is having spaces for people to actually exist. So I recognize again that there's going to be some quality questions. You have lots of information in front of you that you can also digest on your own. But that's the state of public education. We really have seen significant erosion in adequate funding, specifically over the last 12 years. And again, that erosion of funding means that class sizes are increasing, class sizes are getting more complex, and we have less and less access to those resources that we know can help kids thrive and help kids reach, again, their best selves. And so we're hoping that, as Jenna Brown's research has shown, that when we have people who are aware of a problem, then they can advocate for a problem and they can recognize, again, like just how very important it is to make sure that our students receive the absolute best in public education. Thank you.
Okay, let's get into the Q&A, and I'd ask you to line up here with your questions. State your name, don't give us your life story, and no more than 2 questions. And if you prefer to, if you're shy, if you prefer to write it out, you can give me a written question, and I'll get it into the pipeline. So I'm going to ask you to stand over there, yeah, and away we go.
Gail Stevenson is my name. I'm glad to be a retired educator. I don't envy you. 2 questions. Are teachers migrating from the public system to the private system? And secondly, is there a difference in remuneration in the 2 systems?
So our research doesn't show that necessarily. And typically private schools actually pay a little less. They do, what private schools do is they spend more on more teachers. So class sizes are typically, they meet the averages for sure. What the private schools tend to, and this is not across the board 100%, but private schools also have the ability to select students. Public education does not. We take whichever students we are given, and we're happy to. But private schools have ways of weeding students out, which means those complexities are weeded out as well. So smaller class sizes, less ability to have those challenges in the classroom, make results higher. And that is absolutely true. Private schools tend to have higher results, but it's not as simple as black and white, apples to oranges. We're actually pineapples to guava fruit or something like that in terms of comparing those two together.
Thank you. Sorry.
Pardon me, Violet Meekmoss, my name. I guess I would like some clarification on who's responsible actually for setting that budget and determining the amount of money that your board gets. Is it the school board that submits those budgets to the city, or does it have something to do with the province, or is it a combination of those? I'm not really sure where those figures come from. And I'm also wondering if there's a difference between the class sizes in the Catholic system and the public system. Thank you.
I'll take that one too.
All right. Education funding used to be done considerably different. There used to be local taxation, and you still write it on your taxes, whether you want your money to go to a public system or a separate system. Doesn't matter. It all goes to the government. The government sends it down as a per pupil funding, and there's formulas and all that. Then there's some other stuff. There's grants for buildings, there's grant for maintenance, there's grant for transportations, and that sort of stuff. It is the school board's job to take what they are given and decide where best to spend that. That might be on a building, that might be on instruction. Some is targeted in different places. So it's a really complex system, but our funding comes from the province. Some of that is through municipal taxes, which do get collected, but they are sent to the province and then sent back to the school boards. As for the separate system versus the public system, they are virtually identical. There is no significant difference between the two. In Alberta, public education actually describes public system, the separate Catholic system, and all Francophone schools as well. Though that is what is considered the public system in Alberta. And there's very little difference between them. There's a little less in the Francophone system because there's a little less Francophones. But they get the same funding generally as everybody else.
Oh, sorry. Change that.
Okay. Hi, my name is Yvonne Jones, and I am a retired educator. I have seen many disturbing incidences in schools regarding behavior and things, and I volunteer at Westminster in the morning. And anyway, my question, which probably everybody will gasp at, is why do you not have a Dorothy Gooder situation anymore? Because I'm a teacher. I taught English. I can teach you to read, but I'm not a psychologist or a child development expert. And I think it's very unfair to dump all those problems on a person who doesn't have. And another thing, the teacher assistants are the lowest educated of all, and they're the ones that are handed the problems. Anyway.
I'll take that one again.
Yeah. Yes. So Dorothy Gooder was a special student for mostly students with Down syndrome back in the 70s, I believe it shut down. I was a learning support teacher for many years, and I actually spent a year at the board office as the inclusive education lead teacher for Lethbridge Public Schools. The general research, so it's not just people deciding this, is that bringing those students into a typical classroom is better for definitely those students, but it's also better for the rest of the students in that they build empathy, they build other supports and that sort of thing. The issue that we currently have is that those students are unsupported. These students, when I first was a learning support teacher, I was at Alan Watson. I don't remember if any of you remember that school. We had targeted programs there for students in high school who needed vocational skills and weren't typically going to go to university or college. They needed a job, but they also needed to be members of society. So we taught them all the regular stuff and got them a job. and it was fantastic. I actually had an epiphany this year walking up a mountain in Banff about inclusion. And I think inclusion, and I used to be a proud supporter of inclusion, and I still am. The difference is it allowed the government to be lazy. Doesn't matter which government, non-political in that sense, the government in general, it allowed to push those kids into the classroom and then not support them. And simply take away those supports one by one. It's the boiling frog in the water, it jumps in the water and then you turn it on, no problem. Jumps in the boiling water and he jumps out. So it's that idea that inclusion hasn't failed. And to be honest, teachers are not trained, as you said. There are behavior specialists and they are highly trained. The general teacher gets about one class in education and psychology at the university, and then maybe another half course where they do a little bit more. That's something I've advocated for sure, is that our education, our pre-service education needs to step up and do that too, but there is so much else to do. So it's kind of that catch-22 where it is really good. It's kind of like Connor McDavid on your hockey team. He does a really great job of making the other guys better, but it really weakens your team when he gets paid $20-30 million because that's going to take away some of those better players. It's kind of that same idea.
Throwing in all analogies, there you go.
Hi, my name's Brooke Cully, and I just want to thank you for what you do and how you do it every day. My 2 kids were part of the system, and to report back, they're thriving because of this system here. I remember back in 2010, I believe the Alberta school system was rated 2nd only to Finland in the world as far as excellence is concerned. So 14 years later. I also remember an election around that time where $100 million was promised from a candidate for premier, and I don't know if this is true or not, but the ATA put their support behind that person because of the $100 million that was put in. Anyway, my point being is that it appears that local governance powers are diminished to the point where they put no value back in the classroom. So being a former trustee, I'll ask this question with fear, but can you see the elimination of local governance and put that $100+ million a year it costs to run school boards, the School Boards Association, the Public School Boards Association, the Catholics, and plow that back into the classroom? Can you see that provincially being a realistic option?
Well.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think sometimes I don't know. I think that's the fairest way to say it. We know that we have seen some things from the current government that has tried to politicize school boards more. I'm not sure that that's an agenda item for them or even productive. But I think you're right. It has been difficult for our school boards to be effective when it does feel like they're quite tied. And for context, the Lethbridge School Division is one of the best budgeting divisions in the province. They literally win awards for its transparency and its use of funds. We try as hard as possible in the school division and our trustees and all those who work in the division to put as many resources in front of students as possible. Some other divisions, for a variety of the granting fundings and things like that, they actually do have surpluses. Significant surpluses. And I know that was an issue in the 2015 election, was around some of those surpluses, specifically in smaller rural boards, and whether or not the province was going to collect those. So yes, I agree with you. It would be more helpful to have a better control at the local level. I'm not seeing that needle move in either way.
Hi, just a couple things. Carol kids, sorry, educated at Wilson and Winston. Anyway, there was a slide you had up there talking about aggression. And there was, you had the student percent, 75, parents 11, others at 14, and I would like you to kind of elaborate more on that others section. And I was a public service worker in Alberta for 34 years, and I was on the political action committee of my union at the time for quite a while, and I'm going to assume that teachers are the same as a lot of other public service employees, and really this is political, capital P, and we had a heck of a hard time to get our members to understand, beyond the executive, how it was so important for them to get to know the politics of the situation. And I'll tell you right now, I've got a teacher in my neighborhood with the blue sign, and I've got an orange sign, and I can't figure out what the heck they must be thinking, because I'm trying to think of his students and all the other patients in hospitals. I'm not even a parent, you know? So I'd like you to share some of that, if you have that same problem that I historically had with political action.
You want to do this? Yeah, you get that one.
All right, without getting into the weeds of the research, because I have not memorized all that Phil McCrae put together, under the other category it says community members, other staff, so people not teachers but other staff, and then a combination of just other humans who are experiencing levels of aggression. I'm not sure if that's what you were trying to look for. So that, yeah, so that means that there's some type of conflict. It doesn't always have to be physical. It can be intimidation, coercion, those types of aggression that are being experienced by teachers.
And they're not parents.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, we unfortunately do have people who don't have kids in the system or grandkids in the system, and they still get mad at us for something. Usually that we have not done, but they have perceived it to have been done. I've been the local political engagement officer for our ATA local for the last 3 years. And again, as you recognize, the Alberta Teachers Association is by policy nonpartisan. We are not allowed to give money to political parties as an organization. That's not within our realm. We're not allowed to publicly endorse as an association who we like. We advocate for better public education. If there happens to be different political parties that clearly support public education and other political parties who do less so, then that is for people to understand, including our members. And so one of the things that I shared with our association, and I hate saying it because I really don't like believing it to be true, but there are 45,000 teachers in this province, and we are pretty spectacularly average. Not at our jobs. I believe we're better at our jobs. But as human beings, we are spectacularly average. So if you take a group of 45,000, there are going to be a certain portion of people who support one party, another party, this idea, that idea, that idea. So in that realm, like that just helps us understand your situation in your neighborhood with the different signs. So our job, of course, is to continue to advocate our members to understand public education and the policies that support public education, and typically the other people who are in politics that often advocate for public education.
Beth Mundell-Atherstone, thank you very much. Really appreciate the data that you've brought here. My entire career was in education, starting off as a young teacher, then going on to be a professor here in the Faculty of Education, training teachers, and then ending up back as a school psychologist with Palliser Regional Schools. So I know at each of these levels what went on. When I started at the university, Lethbridge Faculty of Education was known as the best in North America. The best in North America. We had to turn students away with thousands of students applying to be teachers. It's very worrying to hear that because of the current situation, those numbers are going down dramatically. I'd like to know, because I hear people, just like our last questioner, people who don't really understand the difference between provincial and federal politics. So I'd like to know from the social studies teachers, what is taught in terms of provincial and federal politics? And I'd also like to know, what can we do to help the average Albertan voter understand the difference between beating up the teachers for what's happening and knowing that this is actually a provincial government funding issue? Thank you.
Perfect, that sounds great. Yeah, I teach high school, so I'm not sure about the elementary school in terms of social studies curriculum, but our grade 9, we focus on the Canadian government, and we do go into really what the powers are of our governing systems. And then grade 12, we really delve into what that means more along the ideological perspectives, but we do go into and have discussions around where funding lies as we're going into some of the current events and the challenges that we're facing within our society. So our students should definitely be coming out of high school with an understanding that constitutionally our federal government is responsible for certain amounts of funding or certain areas of funding, and our provincial governments, they have jurisdiction over other areas. I think that it would be fantastic to have that information more widely available, especially for citizens, so that they understand that when it does come to our public education system, this is something that is provincially regulated. And our province is the one who's determining not only what our curriculum is and what our students are going to be learning, and that's going to be different from one province to the next. It also changes what our students are receiving in terms of investment into their education and then into their futures. Being able to have more people who are aware and advocating for that and telling their friends, even just within conversations, that's one of the best ways to get information out, is to just start to talk to people and to make sure that it becomes more widely known, and that happens on an individual basis as we start to make those connections.
Thank you, Barb Phillips, and thank you. And I consider all teachers professionals, and you are a professional. And back in the day, I was a teacher, and so I went through the Klein cuts when our photocopier could not be fixed because we didn't have the money. Well, you know, it's a bit challenging to teach grade 8 math and write your tests on the board when we had things called blackboards. Anyway, to the point, because now I'm just a grandma, listening and sometimes talking quite a bit. I'd like to ask about the current French immersion curriculum, because I have 2 grandchildren, one in grade 2 and one in grade 4 up in Edmonton area, and I hear a whole lot of rants about that curriculum and tears coming home with the children as they are learning stuff that they barely know. They live in the city of Sherwood Park, I believe. But anyway, and then on the other hand, to contrast, I have a daughter teaching in a private school, and her numbers are beautiful in her classroom, but those parents pay, I think it's around $1,800 per month for that child to be there. No less stress for her because parents want results. And I think a third of her class is on an IPP, so she's not without her own problems. So could you speak also to that? So I guess 3 questions, French immersion and that, and also this government stress on having all these charter schools, which are just taking money from the public system, is my belief. Thank you.
You do the French immersion, I'll do yours. Okay, so we have French immersion, we have public system versus private system a little bit, and charter schools. Yes, private schools can charge whatever they want. Plus, they get 70% of the funding. Do the math, 1,800. Let's go by 10. It's $18,000. A typical student in public system gets around $11,000. So take your other math. So 70% of 11 is about 8. Total for that student is about $24,000. Imagine what we could do if every student had $24,000 with them. It would be fantastic. I just want to briefly address one thing Brooke said, where we used to be second in the English-speaking world other than Finland. We still are very high. Don't forget that. I'm going to challenge you to say that that has nothing to do with government policy, government curriculum. I think that's on teachers. I really do. But I don't think it's also sustainable. We have been dropping, that's absolutely true, and I think that's a symptom of the disease. As for charter schools taken away, there used to be a limit where there was 15 charter schools in the province. That was it. And those could be specialty schools, things that you couldn't get in a public school and were necessary in a certain area or something like that. It's hard to find those examples because there was only 15 of them. I believe Winsport School at the one time, which is in Calgary, which was a specialty school for student athletes. That used to be a charter school. Now I believe, I think Palliser picked that up. They are now a public school. But now there is no cap. You can have a charter school. You want to start a charter school, you can start a charter school. And charter schools are funded almost identically as private schools. And they don't necessarily have to 100% exactly, see how we're going, follow the curriculum.
No governance.
There's not a lot of governance with them either, so there's not a lot of accountability. So that's the other issue with them. As for your daughter in private school, yeah, like there are some benefits, no question, for teaching in the private school. And we don't specifically advocate for private school teachers, but we don't look down on them either. They're teachers, and we want them to be just as empowered as every other teacher in the province, for sure. So, hope that answers your question.
And then French immersion.
Just a little bit. So I am a French immersion teacher at LCI, and I also did 1 year at Ignace Davidson during grade 1. I have heard some stories from colleagues who are still teaching in the elementary school system in French immersion, especially at the beginning of the year when it comes to the new standardized tests that they have to perform with their students who are in grade 1, who sometimes have not gone to kindergarten and don't have any formal French education. And at the very beginning of the year, in September, they are taking a standardized test in French that they don't understand. This is not a good way to welcome students into the education system and has led to many tears of frustration and sadness for both students and parents. And it makes it very challenging for those students to then feel like school is a place that they want to be when their very first experience is a lack of success in the classroom. So there are definitely some challenges within the curriculum right now that will hopefully be addressed and changed, because that's not an acceptable thing for our students to have to go through.
Thank you. I'm Ian Hurdle. First of all, I want to give you a little apology. 5 of my children have probably abused you somewhere through the system in Resler because they're a little bit outspoken. I have a 6-year-old grandson that's negotiation system for neurodevelopment problems, so I'm pretty aware of that. I really think a lot of this comes back to parents. They can't expect you to be a psychologist in the classroom with an overloaded room. They can't say, you can take care of all the discipline. They can't say, I can text my child anytime that I want. They have to be responsible parents for that child and responsible voters. Your comments, please.
I'll start. Sure. Yes, I agree. I've been teaching for 25 years. I remember when I was at Alan Watson, who had learning difficulties, most of our kids, this is how they had their hands, and they would text on a flip phone like this, looking at me. So that was a possibility. When you called them on it, oh, I'm just texting my mom. I don't care who you're texting. The rule is you're not texting. And actually this cell phone ban has been one of the positive things that this government has done, giving us a little teeth with that. We always had a cell phone policy at our school, which is almost exactly the same. We never had any teeth to do it. Now we actually have a little bit of teeth and some backing from government, which is great. I don't care who you're texting. It's a distraction, and it's that disrespect of not just teachers, but adults. And I'm not going to solve society's ills. I think it's a societal problem in general, that we have that lack of parental involvement. Parents want to be friends necessarily than necessarily parent. And yes, some of our challenges are dealing with parents and having that control with that. I don't think we'll solve that. I think that's a bigger society problem. I don't think that's a school or education issue. But it's definitely one of those things for sure that we deal with every day. Sure.
Two brief questions and brief answers.
Hi, I'm Gord Grimes. I'm in awe of teachers. Thank you for the work that you do. It's great. But I do have a question. In your handout, there's the line of more students with higher needs. Now, I know society has been changing ever since Noah reached the ark and long before. But I wonder if you have any comments as to the cause of some of these societal changes in behaviors when you get the children at school.
You can go right ahead.
So one of the things that kind of is in my algorithm, and Derek talked about it a little bit, is this concept of screens. I've heard some commentary around medical doctors and others in psychology who are going to say, maybe in 5 years, maybe in 10 years, we are going to look at kids with cell phones when they were 10 the way I look at pictures of kids in the Industrial Revolution smoking cigarettes at 8, and say, how did we ever as a society let that happen? And so we're starting to see some of that, and again, not that the blame is on a screen, but we do have a lot more of that problem with dysregulation, because kids don't learn how to interact with other humans if this is their pacifier. And so that has become the pacifier for kids, and that's how they regulate. There are actually times and places where the only way they calm down is by putting a screen in front of them, and that's not a helpful tool to say that the only way you're regulated is on a screen. So again, it's not all of that feat. We certainly still see some of the negative impacts of some of the schooling interruption during COVID. I have a student in my grade 9 class who has effectively not gone to school for the last 4 years for a variety of reasons. And now that student's in my grade 9 class, and they can't read. They're in grade 9. There's 27 students in that class. I have no head assistant, and so there are times and spaces where obviously I can help that student read and help the student navigate some of the cues. But at 14 years old, he can't read. And so again, when we don't have the resources and we don't have any specialized programs or accessibility, because some of them are too full, we do have a literacy and numeracy program at our school, but it's already full. We have an English as an additional language program that helps largely refugees' family who have no limited schooling. There's 16 kids in that class with 8 different languages. So again, like there is that level of it. So effectively, what we're seeing in classrooms in terms of behaviors is largely connected to a lot of unregulated use of screen time, especially for kids. And of course, that went on hyperspeed during the pandemic, because that's all you had access to during those times when you had to quarantine or weren't allowed to be at school and in different situations. So there still is some of that hopefully will iron itself out, as time and water under the bridge. but it won't just happen with time, right? We're going to have to make sure that we have those specialized resources for those kids with behavior issues.
Let's try and squeeze in 2 quick questions. We'll take Mark and then the gentleman there who hasn't been up yet.
Mine's an answer.
Pardon?
Mine's an answer.
Okay. Very brief.
Okay, my name is Mark L, and my question will be regarding your pension plans. Are all the teachers from the different systems, the public, charter, etc., under the same pension plan? And also, how do you feel about having your pension? Are you happy? Is that great on morale that the pension has been transferred to income?
Okay, I'll take that one. Yeah, all public school. I don't know about private schools, but we have the Alberta Teachers Retirement Plan is all public school pensions. We actually took. I remember being at in Edmonton at the ATA in Provincial Executive Council chambers, so our governance. I was a guest there, and the head of our teacher welfare came to the door and looked at our executive secretary and her head was about to explode. This was when the omnibus bill that took away the pension fund and put it to AIMCO. We sued the government and got it back. I'll tell you this, we are controlling our pension. It's still in AIMCO, but we control the management decisions. We did extremely well. And in fact, Alberta government is paying 1% less next year because of the returns that we were managed to do. And teachers are paying less too. Our pension is great because we are doing our management decisions ourselves. AIMCO is not doing well.
Gordon Grimes, Beth Mental Atherstone. Gordon Grimes asked the question about why there's so many children with difficulties. In the past, if we're looking way past, children who had difficulties first weren't sent to school, or they went to places like Dorothy Gooder. We didn't have this inclusiveness of having so many kids with so many difficulties in the classrooms. Also, children often left school early. We had a farming community where children could go and work on the farms. When I was school psychologist at Palliser, I remember that the provincial government at that time thought that we were actually manufacturing children with problems so that we could get special ed teachers. They actually asked us why the numbers were going up, but it's simply there. We are identifying more and more children because more children are going to school. Also, more children are surviving birth at younger ages, so we have a lot of children who are preemies with multiple problems who are going into school, and this brings problems with them. Thank you.
Quick question. My name is Gordon Lee. Quick question to take you all afternoon to answer. What is going to be the effect of AI on education at all its aspects, both in terms of your app for teachers, control, information being received, who's manufacturing that information, what's the answer? Or do we have a clue? It's here.
I'll take that.
In 10 words or less.
Yeah, sure. Phil McRae, who's our research guy and is a huge digital guy, says AI will not replace teachers, but teachers not using AI will be replaced. If that makes sense. So we need to embrace it in a certain way, but teaching is, a computer can't teach. I'll go with that.
Okay, we've had a wonderful session, and before you respond, you get the last word. So, is there any message you'd like to give, or summary comment you want to make before we close?
For us, the message is simple, and it's the reason why we're here, is we need more people understanding and telling our stories in public education than just ourselves. Because again, typically in our circles, it's not fun to share and have a beer with Kevin because he's just going to tell you the problems that exist and how to solve them. And so my hope is, of course, that you share the information that you now understand, that you, again, have access to other information online, and you can go and understand the issue in a richer way, and then choose to have those conversations yourselves, right? Like, I'm always shocked when sometimes people see the image of how underfunded we are, and I just go, how did people not know that? But the bubble that I live in, okay, obviously most people know. All of the bubbles that you are a part of in all the different organizations, including this one, you can now share that information and say, did you know, or have you heard, or whatever your great takeaway is from this. But in the end, we know it is a people business, and a people business needs to hire people, and to hire people, we have to have funding. And the beautiful thing is we can do this. It's entirely within the realms of possibilities. We are not a province that cannot afford this. We are a province that right now, for one reason or another, is willfully deciding to not to. And so, but we are our best people. Of course, the social studies teacher is going to tell you, if you live in Lethbridge West, remember, polls are open, and you can go vote today and tomorrow and Sunday, and of course voting on Wednesday. And yes, exercise your democratic right, but also make sure you're that engaged citizen who emails MLAs, emails ministers, emails premiers, and make sure that they understand that when 75% say classes are too big, that's a lot of people. But if we're the only ones saying it, right, if we're the only ones sharing that information as the Alberta Teachers Association, it might be lost. Whereas if we hear advocates and other people who are supporting public education doing it, it can only further, hopefully, the idea that we will one day live in a province that reaches the national average of public education funding.